we just believe power holders shouldn't be able to incite mass death without consequences.
You're listening to Mobilizing Data for Justice, a podcast about how activists gather and make sense of data. This episode is an edited interview with Alex from the Accountability Archive. Alex tells us about how he got involved in archiving, why the work is important, and how it's impacted him.
And in terms of how we all became involved in data activism or digital activism, it was really just an accident, a fluke more than anything. The three of us were on a train up to one of the massive ceasefire marches up in London early on in the assault on Gaza towards the end of October. And I was feeling quite guilty that I wasn't being vocal enough or I wasn't doing enough. And I just sort of said out loud, would it be useful if we started collecting evidence on the things that power holders are saying? Because at that point, already politicians, journalists, public figures were expressing a huge amount of appetite for violence against Palestinians. And I just said, is it worth us trying to capture some of this? And serendipitously, Philip had been having a conversation with another academic about how fragile digital records are, kind of counterintuitively. I think, we think of old letters and stuff as being fragile, but people held on to those. And so there are extensive records of that sort. Whereas, if someone switches jobs now, their email inbox gets wiped, and so we lose a lot of digital records. And so he was really on sort of the same page as me. And I think we were also all thinking about Iraq a lot and the lack of accountability that happened in the West for the crimes committed there. There were these mass death atrocities predicated on lies, and most of those who were baying for blood are still active in the media, still active in politics. I grew up in the US. I don't sound like it, but I did. And I remember the rhetoric at the time and all of the dehumanization of Arab people and as justification for getting into Iraq and Afghanistan. And I just thought, that can't happen again. We just believe power holders shouldn't be able to incite mass death without consequences. Something should happen. If you're a politician, if you're a journalist and you are out there justifying or calling for the slaughter of people or the destruction of civilian infrastructure, whatever it is, there should be a record of that speech, and that should haunt you, and that should be prohibitive for seeking office, for having powerful positions where you're in charge of people. We started with just a Google form and a Twitter account and a prayer. And then, we were slightly paranoid and worried about being infiltrated. So we started having lots of people reach out in terms of web development. And we finally found someone who we knew shared an allotment with one of Philip's activist friends. And we thought, okay, well, if you do allotment gardening, you can't be that evil. So we trusted him to build our website. And I think initially, we just wanted to grab statements, and then the more we read about digital archiving, we thought, okay, we need to build something that's robust and can capture things that are admissible in court, evidence before it disappears, because we learned that in 2017, for example, YouTube took down loads of evidence of war crimes in Libya because it fell afoul of their terms of service. And so we thought, okay, we have two missions here. One is to grab as much evidence and create a big archive, but the second is to, hold people to account. And it's really like the marriage of those two. And so once we found our web developer, who's just been an absolute godsend, we had him build our bespoke web tool, which scrapes links to original posts or articles or whatever it might be, that people crowdsource. So it's open to everyone who follows us, and that you can go to our website, enter a link, and it automatically gets archived, both in the third party system as well as ours. The way our system works is that someone enters a link to, it can be anything really. It can be a tweet, it can be a news story, anything that's on the web. They enter the link, and first we run it through a third-party site like either archive.today or the Wayback Machine, which are just sort of open source web archiving tools. And that's mostly because we want another party to be holding the data. So if we get taken down, it exists somewhere else, and we can have the links to their copy. And then from there, depending on the API of the site, we pull any media files associated with the post. So say it's a tweet with a video, we pull the video so that we have an original copy. And we also take our own screenshots of the web page, so that we have a copy of that. We have a copy of any media files associated with it. And users, when they're uploading the link, will enter a bunch of fields around, the author, who is saying it, what date was it said, what type of, is it a post, is it an article, and which country and which language. And so that all gets stored in our system as well. On the back end, we now have a functionality. We have a dashboard where we have three levels of access. So we're currently reaching out to media organizations, legal groups, and other users who think they would benefit from it, Palestinian human rights groups more broadly, and they can get viewer access where they're able to just go into our system and view. We have over 34,000 individual submissions now, and they can sort through all of that and filter the content and search through it. There's also an analyst level of access where we've hired analysts to come through and start tagging and categorizing the data. So that's, cleaning it up, making sure that the user entered data is correct around, who said it, et cetera, et cetera. But also, having a look through what has been submitted and finding, themes, tags that we want to put in there. Who is it, direct or indirect in terms of, is it someone reporting on something that's been said, or is it direct speech from an individual, as well as what's the subject material, and how can we connect it to other posts in the archive. And then finally, there's administrative levels of access, which we have. And we're hoping eventually that we will publish it once it's all been analyzed, but that's a ways down the road. Yeah, so we've really relied on social media. That's our big strategy for reaching people. We have a Twitter account now with over, I think, 56,000 followers. And we have an Instagram account with 2,700, something like that. Philip's very good at social media strategy, and just he's big on Twitter anyways. And so we came up with a social media brand, a social media strategy. And part of that was, we can have a list of examples on the website that show what evidence we're looking for. And I'm happy to go through those. But we thought the best thing was to grab examples in situ on the internet, things people have posted, and highlight them for the audience and say, please log things like this that you encounter. Please look at your local officials, their Twitter accounts, their statements on their websites, and start logging them, hold them to account. And so, because of where we're geographically located, and because of the fact that we primarily post in English, most of the data comes from the Anglosphere. So a lot of it's from the UK, a lot of it's from the US, and then also Australia. However, it quickly spread beyond that. Once we had traction on social media, it was quite easy then to get a bit of a name for ourselves and approach the people who would want to use it. Reached out to a bunch of the legal teams, a bunch of the big media organizations that, we thought would benefit from being able to search through this, and approach them. I will say, it's kind of surprised me that the people online who have found it really inspiring, and really have done a lot of the work. We had a woman with chronic fatigue syndrome at one point post about she couldn't go to marches. She couldn't, do a lot of the things people were doing quite visibly and vocally, but she could log things on our archive system. And she felt that was very comforting to know that she was doing something that mattered. It's changed. I don't think any of us anticipate. We knew it would be bad, right? Like, I think anybody who's been following the Palestinian cause for any amount of time knew as soon as October 7th happened that the response was going to be bad. I don't think any of us foresaw what has happened. But what I wasn't anticipating was, for example, early on, it was things like politicians saying the violence will end, the war will end when they return the hostages, because that's actually in breach of Article 33 about collective punishment. You know, you cannot collectively punish a group of civilians to achieve military or political objectives. And so we would ask people to log examples of politicians advocating for collective punishment, or talking about targeting civilian infrastructure. Oh, well, we should just blow up all the water infrastructure. Things like later on attacks on UNRWA, the baseless accusations built on scant evidence from torture, and Western countries pulling funding for UNRWA, justifying that pulling of funding. Again, collective punishment of 2 million people who rely on UNRWA's services, as well as, defamation of protesters and protests. we our aim is long term to publish it, and make it freely available to everyone. In the interim, we want to make sure we don't get sued. So we want to make sure that everything we publish is verified by analysts, and that it falls under the categories that we're looking for. Because of the crowdsourced nature, we don't want people to put stuff in that's fake, doesn't apply to what we're doing. So we want to clean the data set before we just put it out there. We want to cover ourselves a bit and get some legal advice before we do that, just because of the sensitive nature. I mean, I'm not that worried. We're not putting anything out there that people haven't posted to the internet themselves. It's all publicly available, but it's a hot topic, and we wanted to make sure it was as clean and it was as usable as possible before we put it out there. We have an ethos that, like, Mehdi, Philip, and I are all doing this volunteering, but if you're doing the grunt work, if you're doing the boring stuff of sifting through the data, you should probably get paid. So we're not paying much, but we're trying to give them a little bit. I think one of the main challenges is that people didn't know where this data was going. We had to build a lot of trust. Palestinians were rightfully concerned that it wasn't going to be used for what we said it would be. We had to really stress Philip's humanitarian background, his work in the Arab world. We had to build that trust, particularly because there were other groups out there that were offering to do the same thing in a much more politicized way, and in a way that I felt certainly uncomfortable we being associated with. It felt sort of white nationalist. It felt very fascist, a lot of these accounts, if I can put not too fine a point on it. And so we had to differentiate ourselves from that, and try to seem a bit more serious and high-minded about it. And so that was a big challenge. I think we've come out on the other side of it now. I think we've established that we are partnering with serious people. We are partnering with organizations that are trying to affect change. And we do have a plan. I think we've also been very clear in our policies that we post periodically that we won't tolerate anti-Semitism in our comments, in our quote tweets. If you are posting that sort of thing, we will block you. And so we've been quite aggressive in saying, like, we just don't have any tolerance for it. We don't have tolerance for any racial hatred, any hate speech. And so I think, being serious about that, being open about it has given us a degree of protection. That doesn't mean people don't spout off in the comments periodically, but we we try our best. It's never going to stop everything. It's a common refrain. I think, unfortunately, it does damage to genuine cases of anti-Semitism. That's what I'm concerned about a lot. I think it's damaged that claim, and makes people less safe. It makes it more difficult to police actual hate speech. But I do think it's also, it holds less water now. We've seen this game plan play out so many times that people are a bit inured to it now. In a previous interview, Mehdi said that he found it very cathartic actually working on this, because he's from South Lebanon and he's grown up forever with Israeli aggression. His family have, for as long as they've been alive, grown up with Israeli aggression. And so being able to do something about it has been very positive for him. I'm coming from the other direction. I grew up very privileged in the US. I've found it very exhausting and just deleterious for my mental health. The sheer number of bodies I was seeing, to be frank, was very difficult to process. And I do a lot of the social media for the account, and we get tagged in some of the most horrible things I've ever seen in my life. And that took its toll. And it feels uncomfortable to complain when people are living it and are trapped there and can't get out. It's difficult. I worry about in the future when we begin to analyze the Israel-based data, who's going to be doing that? How are we going to protect them psychologically? Can we crowdfund some therapy for them? It weighs. And I think, I was talking about this recently. It's just not good to take in this much speech, this much hateful speech about a group of people. It's not good to imbibe constantly the bile that people feel comfortable putting out. You're not meant to see that much dehumanizing rhetoric, I think. I think we're supposed to hopefully believe that on the whole, human beings are good. And so every single day going in and seeing the worst of what humanity has to offer is challenging. But it's also, this is the most important thing I've ever done. I think most of us feel that way who are working on the project. Find your niche, I think. We were very lucky that the Palestine Institute for Public Diplomacy reached out very early on and did a big survey mapping all of the different projects going on related to archiving the genocide. And it made sure that we were definitely not redoubling our efforts. So we were able to see exactly what our niche is, and we were the only ones who were really focusing globally around sort of Western leaders outside of the Israeli chain of command directly. And so we found our niche very quickly. But I would say, just do it. Just do it and figure it out as you go. Time is of the essence. Time is one of the things that I wish we had more of. There are so many things that have been lost because we didn't have the tool at the beginning of the aggression. I was speaking with a Palestinian friend a couple of weeks ago, and he was talking about land deeds and wills and things like that, all the legal documents that are just gone now, and we were too slow to capture that. And I wish our system had been up in place so that we could have crowdsourced that. I'm nobody, and we've built this, so like finding your group, finding the people who have the various skills and going for it is key. Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've heard from academics at different institutions that they're being blocked because of the political nature of the crisis. We've heard academics at big institutions say, actually, I'm being told I can't archive things to do with Gaza. And because we're just a group of people, we're just doing this. We are agile and nimble enough to grab whatever it is we want. Kristen Kristen Parker at one point, when I first met with her, she said to me, grab whatever you can and worry about sorting it out later. Just grab it. And that's, I think, key is like you will regret 100% of the things that you don't grab later.
Mobilizing Data for Justice is a podcast by the Data Justice Hub at Concordia University and the University of Winnipeg, in partnership with Harbinger Media and with funding from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. Production by Elena Rowan, an interview by Chris Hurrell and Kevin Walby. From the Data Justice Hub, the Mobilizing Data for Justice team is me, Elena Rowan, Chris Hurrell, Marius Senneville, and Kevin Walby.